special meeting for 6 o'clock. All board members are present with the exception of Michelle Lewis, who is excused this evening. We have on here our date and location of our next meeting on our agendas is set for November 26th. However, we don't really have an agenda. So,
should we wait and see how tonight goes?
Did you talk about the last meeting, or did for access?
Not that I recall. The 26th. We have a budget meeting workshop scheduled for the Tuesday after holiday break as well, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think we brought up ideas for longer term. Wasn't it?
Okay.
I think in regards to the finish and numbers, we're going to wait until talk about it. Have a federal regular board meeting.
Yep, high school class size will be on the first meeting in December that we discussed. The Jackie Grinch presentation, I believe, is on the horizon for either the January or February meeting. And those are items that we were talking
I
about.
feel like maybe that's not like during budget season that we talk about that one. Maybe we
Right.
I have nothing to discuss. I know Debbie's hoping to have revenues, but we don't.
Right. But we will have that information for our budget workshop on first Tuesday in December.
Yeah, so we don't meet the 26th. The next meeting will be a budget meeting, and that will be our regular first.
Yes.
December 3rd and then December 10th.
Still gives us plenty of time for making sure that the board has voted on a budget to bring forward to the public hearing, which is until January. We're still in good shape, time-wise.
Everyone okay with that? All right, next up is public communication and correspondence. Seeing none, we can go into our budget work session. We have some new information in there.
Yep, I provided everyone with some new information this evening. We're getting a little colorful this evening. We have 3 different colored sheets, so I'll go by the colors. The pink sheet, one of the new pieces of information that we found out is that our health insurance fortunately didn't come in at 15%. It came in at 11%, which is 1% higher than what we anticipated in the original proposed budget. So we made some adjustments to the top part of that sheet, which is known as known budget adjustments. These are all things that we've talked about already. We categorize them as known because they're basically a given based on our discussions, as well as contractual obligations such as separation and longevity and so forth. And we know that our health insurance is coming in at 11%, which was quite a savings compared to what we were looking at when it came in at 15%. So your known budget adjustments to the proposed operating budget that was originally brought to you on October 3rd is an additional $38,000. The potential other adjustments on this sheet we've discussed. The board has made no decisions on any of those other items. So currently our proposed operating budget is at 1.69%, which was the original proposal. So I want to bring you to the blue sheet, or purple. What do you call that, periwinkle?
Just to confirm, the pink sheet makes the 1029 white sheet obsolete now.
Yes, thank you very much. So the next sheet sort of broke it down for you with what was presented on 10-3 at a 1.68% was the proposal, just off by the 1.69, but that's rounding. The known adjustments, that additional $38,000, puts your subtotal budget at 1.82% and your total budget at 1.06% of an increase. We do have for you this evening the default number, which is the next section there. You can see the default subtotal budget is coming in at $27,636,375. That's a difference of $341,600. That's a 1.25% increase is what the default is at this point, which puts the total budget with the default is the 0.52%. That's without making any other adjustments to the proposed budget other than the known adjustments. Questions so far? Okay, then I'll move you to the green sheet. Again, as presented, the proposed budget on 10-3 is a 1.68% increase. If you take the known adjustments as well as all of the potential other adjustments that are on the first sheet, you'll be able to decrease that proposed budget by $108,236. That puts your subtotal budget at 1.29% of an increase. And your total budget at a 0.55% increase. That's if you were to make all of those potential other adjustments.
Okay, so the green sheet gets rid of the CES fifth grade teacher. It reduces the raises for administrators and specialists to 2.5%. It decreases the subs to $125. It does the adjustment for the payroll benefits coordinator, the adjustment for the PSAT testing, and the adjustment for the classroom support.
That's correct.
So that is not reflected at all in
On the
this.
purple.
Okay. Just want to be clear.
One more question.
Sure.
I'm a visual person, so I'll do a visual. The bottom of this, how does that compare to the top of this? Same thing?
Yeah, you see the 1.68% is the overall proposed.
So just like a one.
Depends how the formula goes.
Oh.
So, yeah.
But it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
It's rounding. So what you're seeing is if you were to do all the adjustments on the pink sheet, that brings your subtotal budget on the green sheet to 1.29%. Your total budget at 1.55% of an increase. Your default has not changed at a 1.25% increase and a 0.52% increase for your total. So if you were to make all of those other adjustments, just as Randy had pointed out on the pink sheet, you're looking at your proposed budget is approximately $10,000 higher than your default budget. So that's what we have for you this evening for discussion.
Can some elaborate on, specifically with the default budget? I'm assuming like administrator increases would be 0%.
Correct.
My understanding is special ed went down. In the default budget, would the special ed be the same as last year? Would that go?
No,
It goes
it
down.
goes down because that's a known. We know that those students are not within the district, so we have to decrease the default.
So, without looking myself, what are the drivers of the default budget? Other than contracted salary and benefits?
Correct.
So it's contracted salary and benefits and any contracted services, like the bus contract would be in there. If we have contracts for the repair and maintenance in the buildings and grounds, any contracts we have for tech, those contracts are in there.
pink sheet and deciding whether we're going to move forward with those adjustments. Teacher vacancy, administrators. Are we all agree what we're going to do with those?
So, just out of curiosity, before we go down there, I know a couple of people have talked about the Schedule B, and I think the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, you had said that we would have to basically break open the bargaining agreement to do any type of reduction of that Schedule B. I'm just kind of curious, what would that process look like? I'm not advocating for it, I'm just kind of curious what if we chose to look at that Schedule B.
So the board would put a request into the SREA to open up contract for negotiations. It could be specific to Appendix B. The SREA would have to agree to open it up for negotiations, and then you get around the table and you start to negotiate. That should be a timely process.
My sense is you're basically reopening negotiations on the whole contract.
You can say specifically, we're only opening up for this purpose. And again, that could potentially take some time, and put you well beyond the budget process to negotiate Appendix B specifically. Now, the SREA could come back and say, yes, we're willing to open up the contract, but we also want to discuss all of these other items. So that alone, you're negotiating between the board and the SREA as to what you're opening up the contract for.
Sounds like there's some potential for unintended consequences.
Right. I mean, Sean, you had said that if we do anything with the robotics, we're going to find it somewhere else in the budget. Thinking about this outside of that meeting, I can come back to, well, let's find it in Appendix B, but you can't find it in Appendix B without renegotiation.
Better places to.
That would be the easy place to find something. Or, I'm sorry, outside of negotiation, that would be the easy place to find.
So there's something that maybe I'm just not reading this right, but the periwinkle page. Are we saying that the difference between the default budget and the proposed is really only $155,000? Like that's what this board has been playing with for weeks?
Yes.
That's how. It's a very humbling experience to realize that all the effort that goes in here for $155,000.
Well, we're not talking about personnel. We're only talking, 18% of the budget anyway.
Right? I'm just saying that when you actually look at the difference.
Would it be, because I don't generally live in the SB2 sort of world, if you have I look at the page of potential adjustments, the board may think of those as a roadmap. So if you land on your default budget, right, you know how to get it. And it's not a whole lot of money. And so then you think about whether you want to inflict pain, right, or any future consequences to trying to set your targeted budget at the default, or do you want to go back to what the original proposal was, 1.5%, 1.6% increase, knowing that you can make these adjustments if you end up with a default. But that's how I would tend to look at what the future looks like. If you curtail your specialist or your administrative pay raise to 2.5, what does that look like? Right? Now you're scrambling, you lose people, and you scramble and you can't hire, and just project forward from that whether it makes sense to sign up for these. I think is the next step. It's the way the town tends to look at budgeting. Same way. What's the consequence going forward of making the change now? And if you lose an argument or you lose something at a town meeting, in Canterbury's case, or on the deliberative session for Belmont, you have a roadmap.
we be in the same boat if, you know, if we get the class numbers and we look at them and we say, oh, geez, holy cow, you know, this, it would make sense to do a, you know, 5 faculty reduction in force. So the reduction in force, does that push us in, is that a negotiated thing as well?
That's included in the negotiated contract already, how a reduction in force would be played out if one were needed.
Okay.
And the responsibility of the board is to notify the SREA that they are considering a reduction in force. What's the first formal step in a RIF?
I'm just making sure it wasn't, I think we were all surprised when we found out that the minutes lead was, you know, negotiated fees. So I just wanted to make sure that the reduction force was negotiated fees.
And it spelled out the whole formula of how you determine who's going to be reduced.
So this past year, we had, what was it, $1.6 million left at the end of the year. That was included in the revenues. How much of that was the revenues and how much was it from the actual budget that we had? Do you happen to remember?
I don't remember, but I can go back and look.
The majority of that, Edgar, was our fund balance
Yeah.
of monies that were not spent during the year. The majority were vacancies and the benefits associated with the vacancies.
Yeah, so technically, if the board was left with the default budget, you don't really have to make any changes anywhere because I don't know how much was from the fund balance last year, but if you have that much left at the end of the year, because you're not spending it or you don't have the staff in, wherever that funding came from, that was left at the end, if you end up with a default budget and the difference is only $155,000, obviously we have a history of having so much money left at the end of the year that it would even affect the district, right?
Well, that's the assumption that none of those positions continue to be filled. We are starting to get more applicants and we are starting to fill some positions. The other issue with the default budget is our support staff are not unionized, so they would get no increase. I mean, we already know that the administrators and the specialists would not be in at an increase, but then you'd end up, in my opinion, not being able to pay people again, and then we would start losing people again, and then the whole cycle's going to start again. So the default budget, even though it's a number and the board can adjust how they need to, you've got to worry about your contractuals first. So that leaves a lot of your staff not getting increases, not seeing any, and not talking support staff.
And I would say specifically around the teacher vacancies that we were unable to fill, that was due to late resignations.
Right.
So we were already outside of the hiring window, if you will, for candidates that are looking to fill those positions. So late resignations really had an impact on us being able to fill those teaching vacancies.
So Edgar brings up about, we retained funds last year. What can we use those funds for? Are there other things in here that we could use? Are there buildings and grounds, instead of taking $100,000 from the general fund, can we use stuff for that? And what can we use that money for? Because we just sit on it year over year. And I know we have used it for emergency things that come up in the past, but it is still a good chunk of money. I know we've been working towards getting it down, but it's money, it's sitting there. It collects interest, right? So what can we use that?
Yeah, not much
Yeah.
interest.
So the board has in the past utilized those funds for building improvements, particularly to reduce the budget. So they may have pulled out some items in the proposed budget, thinking that they potentially would be using fund balance to fund the building projects. The majority of them were around safety upgrades in the sense of surveillance and blocking internal and external So the board has used fund balance for any type of building improvements. Also, if you recall, the board utilized fund balance particularly to pay for strategic direction work that's happening this year. So the board has reserved monies with an anticipated fund balance in the past.
But we can't estimate fund balance now.
We have them left over from last year.
I thought the books were closed.
Well, the books are closed from last year, so we know what's gone this year. We retained $700,000 this year. So,
So I guess I'm getting confused between retained earnings versus surplus
okay.
money. There's a difference.
There is a difference. Some of the things I know now, like we got the Boca transportation grant. That's paying the Boca transportation this year. We have $100,000 in the budget. Based on that grant, we're not spending that $100,000. So that's going to become part of fund balance. And we are looking at, do we have open positions right now? Are we going to have funds left? Because some of them might be special ed one-to-one behavioral assistants that we're not filling, but I have to pay contracted vendors to get the services. So I'm doing that analysis to try to come up with.
That's different than the topic of retained
That's
earnings.
different than the retained fund balance. And in the past, we did say, when we had negotiated an agreement at one point, we knew we had retained fund balance. And retained fund balance, if you don't spend it, automatically goes into the formula to calculate the new fund balance. So we had said, we have this fund balance, it's retained, but it's going to become part of the formula to calculate the new fund balance. So we used that to offset the collective bargaining agreement that we had presented to voters. Somebody called DRA. DRA called me and said, we're not supposed to be using retained fund balance to estimate revenues. And I said, but it's the same thing. She said, we understand that, you just can't present it that way. So
My question is the $101,600 in the budget for the paving and the baseball field drainage, can we pull that money from either a retained or unbalanced that we know we will have instead of putting it in the budget?
you can do that if the board wanted to use funds from the end of the year and zero that out. The problem then becomes you can no longer count that $100,000 as part of a default budget because you're not consistently budgeting.
Right, this is a one-time thing though.
But it doesn't become a one-time thing. Because if we consistently budget $100,000, which we have been doing in buildings and grounds, then we can maintain that as part of the default budget. If you zero it out one year, then the argument is it's really not part of your default budget. It's not something you typically do.
I wasn't really thinking about the default, I was thinking about the proposed.
Correct. It just has an impact on the following year's default budget.
But you no
Just
longer be
Find a way to do what she's talking about though, like, what?
Because
that
here's
makes
what,
sense.
like, and here's what I'm thinking, now I'm looking at 26, 27, 8. Like, so next year, we're gonna pull 500,000 out of that trust for this payment, that's huge. But there's still money in there. So if we get into a point where we have to build it back up in a default, like, we should incrementally change it, we have nothing on here past.
Well, it's like you said, we're saving 100 or whatever for the transportation, right, that the grants pay. I understand that you have to do calculations to make sure we can cover our other expenses, but let's assume we can cover those other expenses. To me, that feels like funds that we can reallocate to something else this fiscal year and not have it in the budget.
I think the conversation that we're having right now, that the board is having, is the conversation you would be having if you ended up with the default budget. If it was voted down, I'm going to piggyback on what Bob was saying, which is you have a roadmap as to where you would have to, what you could potentially cut out of the proposed budget if you end up with the default. During that conversation, if the default, you could also think about still being able to give the support staff an increase, even with the default. You might start talking about that fund using this year's potential fund balance to cover some of the costs in the proposed budget that will bring you down to the default, and you can use those monies in your default to increase support staff wages. So I think the conversation you're having right now is a little early in the game because you have a roadmap. I'm use your words on that one, Bob, so I like it. You have a roadmap as to how you would get to the default, but if you end up with the default, you can still have more conversations around the use of fund balance to still get some of the things that you needed to take care of.
Can I give you my opinion on where I'm coming from?
I would love that.
We're so close to the default. If we could find $100,000 in the budget this year that we can take out of the budget, the proposed budget, we proposing a budget that's below the default budget, and still providing everything that we want, for the most part, to the school district. That feels like a good thing to sell.
Now, let me tell you where I'm coming from. Thinking about what Bob said about retaining staff, you give them a 2.5% increase. The original one was what, 4? I'm thinking let's find ways to use the money that we retain every year to offset the cost of the budget to go back to that.
None of the bad
And keep it
ideas.
under so that Sean's happy.
It's not a bad idea, you know,
It's like, we sit on this money every year. We carry it over. It has a very, it's what got us in this trouble.
Yeah.
The more that we carry over, the more trouble we're gonna get in. So I say we burn it.
I just want to make sure people are aware that I think they're all good ideas. That it just seems like the comments are being directed that we wouldn't agree with that. We're just telling you what could happen if you make these decisions. So they're all great ideas. It's just a matter of you're looking at a budget right now that is already very close between your proposed and your default. There's also something to be said if you come in lower on your proposed than your default, you're not really giving voters a choice. And people say that as well, so it can backfire in that manner as well. Just talking from experience. They're all great ideas. It's your budget, you work it out. Debbie and I can only provide you, based on experience, what could and could not happen if you make those decisions.
Just want to say one thing back to the conversation you were both having. You were talking about two different things. She was talking about the actual line that puts it on the default budget, right? So if you zero it out, then it goes away from the default. And you were talking about using the extra funds, but what she was trying to focus on was the actual line on the budget,
Right.
which is different than what you were trying to talk about using the fund balance.
I think that anything that's like not a recurring cost, we should be looking at funding this. So there's $155,000 difference between that default and the new proposed. We're sitting on 700,000. That's what I'm saying, is where can we do this to not impact next year's budget, which is actually sad if you think about that. But, we have to put it back.
So ultimately, and following both you and Sean are saying, kind of proposing. So in simplistic numbers, based on the budget that was proposed, let's assume on the pink sheet that we made $500,000 worth of adjustments. We're sitting on $750,000 worth of retained. Could we blanket cover that $500,000 worth of adjustments that we made with the fund balance without having an adverse effect moving forward?
No.
Just as a blanket statement.
No, because if you don't have the increases for support staff in the budget, let's say you take the fund balance and you say, okay, we're going to increase everybody this year out of fund balance, but we're not going to put that into the budget. A year from now, that increase is not reflected in the default budget.
So I'm saying we do that and we find other areas. So as Bob likes to say, we like to major in the minors. I bet there's a lot of stuff in here like chairs, equipment, like things like that that we could get creative with.
Well, That's the thing.
So we always go after our building and grounds stuff. Every year we want to cut stuff, so look there first. Yeah,
I'm
things
not
around
saying
the
we
subject
compare it, I'm
that
saying you find ways to
you want to
use
cut
that
the
money.
paving, cut it in half. I don't know.
So that's not what we're saying, we're saying use the money that we're sitting on.
Yes,
to
but
pay for it.
you're not getting what they're trying to tell you in effects. If this, you give support that the raise, but if it is in the proposed budget in a line item, and you do have these extra funds, you can't keep those raises, they go back to whatever.
Right, so
You can't do it.
I get that, what I'm saying is what else is in here? What are all those little nickel and dime things that are on these rationale sheets that we could use for that? That's what I'm saying.
But all of those nickel and dime things impact the year after. Whatever you cut out, it's not in your following default.
Because
This, yeah, the
Can't
education
just-
rate. Wow.
Can't we just use that money for the new things that we're putting into the budget that wouldn't have been in the default? Does that make sense?
I understand what
So
you're saying.
yes, but it's just gonna affect the following year.
Something new that like a program or something.
Move
That
on.
wouldn't be hard the next year.
Like this $366 for school board dues, can we pay for that money?
It's always gonna happen.
Okay. Separation, 66,000.
Because collective bargaining, it has to go into next year's budget.
That's our money.
Yeah.
so it has to be something that does have a line. Right.
Well, it's not so much that it doesn't have a line, it's, you have to look at what it is you're thinking about. So like the separation pay, the way the collective bargaining agreement is worded, they have to notify us by November, so then we pay it out the following July. That's part of the new budget. We can't take that out of this year's money.
Yeah,
But-
like the CIP projects.
Right, the CIP projects, if you wanted to do over and above to whittle those items down, you could do that. You could wipe out the 100,000 and say, no, we're just gonna use year-end funds. You could eliminate that. But then next year, when I'm doing the default budget, you don't have that 100,000, you can't put it back in.
So what you're talking about is reducing the default budget.
Going
with
forward.
These ideas going forward. Which, again, you're gonna have to find us, if the board is interested in reducing the default budget, then you are gonna have to be proactive in figuring out specifically where you're gonna come to that new default budget number well in advance of putting together your 26, 27 budget.
So we're penalized for being fiscally responsible and using money that was saved to, and this obviously is a bigger issue, this conversation, but that's what it is.
I just want to make sure we're clear though. I'm not pushing for the default budget, I'm just pushing for a number that's closer to that or below that, but still does everything that we talked about doing. That's different than the default budget, which says no raises, whatever. I'm not saying no raises, I'm just saying we obviously cut somewhere in order to get as close to the default budget as we did. We should just be continuing on that.
So,
I'm not trying to go for the default budget.
so, so again, I mean, I'm following you guys down the rabbit hole, for purposes of the conversation. If we're throwing $100,000 a year at capital improvement for paving at the high school. So if next year, if we made a choice to fund that 100,000 out of reserve funds, the following year, we would not be able to budget for that 100,000 in the default budget. However, if the regular budget passes, then that 100,000 would go back in. In the event that the default, or the budget doesn't pass and we revert to a default, we would still be able to fund it with reserve funds because we're gonna have them.
Actually, you bring up an extremely interesting point, Mark. The default budget is what we're contractually obligated to. Why are we contractually obligated to take $100,000 each year?
So it's not just contractually obligated.
Okay.
That is one component of a default budget. So you look at the default budget and you look at we have consistently budgeted $100,000 for maintaining our facilities. That can be part of our default budget. Okay, if you've consistently done a certain practice in certain areas, you can include that in your default budget. You have to include your contractual obligations,
So we've consistently given raises since I.
but it's not required under a contract that's been approved by the voters. It's a little bit trickier, it's a little bit, yeah.
And we've been giving raises because we haven't been in a default situation.
Right, but I'm saying, if we're saying that the $100,000 that we're earmarking for capital improvement projects goes in because we've been historically doing it, why wouldn't raises that we've been historically doing to retain staff be included as well?
Because that number is varied year after year. It's not a consistent number like the $100,000. It's part of our capital improvement plan. It's well laid out. And so it's been a consistent number year after year after year, where salary increases has not.
But even if we went on a default budget in year and a half, we would still be sitting on a reserve fund. So we would be able to fund it anyway, if we so chose. And I'm just for conversation, I mean, Jeff brought up, getting the building grants, nice round number, of $100,000. We could probably, find the extra 50, if we wanted within building grounds, and still be okay if the following year we went default. At least that's my understanding in this conversation, following you down the rabbit hole.
I understand what you're saying. I think the concern is similar to the fifth grade teacher. Once you take it out, it's harder to get it back. So my guess is that's once we take it out, then we have to justify a $100,000 increase.
Well, but it would be, because it would still be part of the proposed budget, and it would only become an issue if we went to default, if voters got mad at us and said we weren't doing our job, and we're gonna show you by not voting for the budget.
Yes. Getting an education on this. So I'm reading what Heidi just handed me on the definition of a default budget, which says that it's the current year budget plus any one-time expenditures plus contractual obligations. So I'm not sure I follow the difference between, you're paying support staff, that's an ongoing budget. In fact, if you give them a bit more money year over year, it's sort of natural. So that doesn't feel like a one-time expense. So but I don't understand the difference. What I do begin to understand, two things, it's interesting. Your budget horizon is really 2 years out, right? You're crafting a budget for next year and then paying attention to what will happen when that budget becomes the next default budget. And so I think that's the sensitivity that I hear from maybe Michael. You said penalize. I'm looking at it in a different way. So on a municipal budget, you try not to memorialize one-time expenses in the budget, right? Because you don't want the baseline for the fire department to be $100,000 higher than it was, and then next year they want 2% more if there's a one-time expense. You pull that out and do it as a separate project or a separate warrant. Here it seems like there's actually, like the $100,000 for building grounds, there's been a long ongoing incentive to include that money so that it's available in the default budget. So it's a different approach. I have a question. You call them trust funds, towns call them cap reserves. You have a cap reserve for building and grounds, right?
Expendable trust fund, yeah.
Expendable trust. And the board are agents to expend? You don't
Yes.
need a vote? So you could conceivably fund some of this building and maintenance out of trust fund.
We do.
Okay.
And-
Like that
and
big
we-
paving project, a lot of it being paid out of that.
Correct,
Okay.
right. And what we do is we look at the capital improvement plan and we try to make sure that we carry 100,000 of that plan in the budget just to maintain the continuity for budgeting. And then anything over the 100,000, we do try to take out of the expendable trust.
I understand now. Doesn't make sense, but I understand.
Yeah,
But I think the effort that the exercise that you're going through, what's in the budget that is a new expense, I think that's what Andy was talking about. Anything we're adding for 25, 26, is there another way to pay for that? so that we, funds that already have the thing, so you're looking for opportunities.
Yes.
Because if I were sitting on your side of the table, I would be looking for opportunities that got me, that gave me a path to a default if I had it, and that gave me a budget that was a supportable increase, right? I mean, voters are going to be unhappy about tax increases, but you walk into with a 1.5% increase, that's about as tight as I think anybody can reasonably expect. So I'd still look at the roadmap to get back to default if I had to. And then I certainly look for opportunities to not add new things, right? If there's another way to pay for new stuff that doesn't plug into the budget. That's probably exactly what your select boards and your citizens would like you to do. This exercise.
Was there a desire to have any decision made point? Or, I don't know if you guys talked about that.
Factor in robotics, will impact this as well.
Yeah, so the robotics piece, is any of that factored into the proposed budget? Nothing?
No, because the board tabled the Appendix B recommendations.
So the Appendix B recommendation is no.
Nope.
We brought up an interesting thought, creating that, I don't know, I'll lay away and make sure on that. It's definitely something to think about.
So Bob, to your point, I originally looked at this as the difference between that 155 and some of the paper elsewhere, but as Debbie indicated, we can't, because if we give these people raises, the next year, their salaries will go down if we use money at one time.
If you ended up in default budget for 26, 27.
I was going to those rates, even if we take the money from that.
And it's
I'm
still
not
a
even
bottom
thinking
line.
about default.
It is still a bottom line budget, right? Everything above the bottom line. I mean, the voters are going to give you $29 million and some change, whether it's default or not, right? And then you guys will decide where it goes, knowing that you have a lot of constraint because of your contractual obligations. So you don't have a broad playing field. But within that broad playing field, then it becomes what level of pain or what level of impact to the educational mission and other services that you feel the need to deliver are you willing to set up?
The other issue too is transparency of what you're doing. So if you're not presenting in the budget that you're giving, let's say, a 2% increase, and you just say, okay, we're going to use fund balance and give that increase anyway, that's really not letting the voters know what your intention is. And then the year after, the voters may have a say at that point.
Love Lincoln Rabbit Hole. So where were you at when we started this conversation?
No, I mean, it makes sense that working off this is a good roadmap. I think it's also just deciding whether it's appropriate to budget things that we know we're not necessarily going to be using, even if it's just a conversation about whether we budget for that, keep it in there, knowing we're not going to some of it, they keep testing about things, you know,
I would say budgeting something you know you're not going to do doesn't pass Debbie's transparency test. The one that would give me pause is up front curtailing the amount of money available to give increases to the administrative staff. I don't think I would take that option right away. I think I would leave that in the budget, knowing that you could cut it if you had to. to get to a default situation. That's the way I would treat that, because I think, like everywhere else, hiring people is becoming harder and harder everywhere. And I don't, you guys would know way better than I how competitive Shaker Regional is compared to, the surrounding school districts. How well we compete for those folks who work with us. Any competitive advantage you compete by.
Just looking at like the CES teacher vacancy, to me, I mean, we had talked about a permanent sub or something, like what if that was that money, and then we knew that if we didn't need it next year, that's a quick thing to grab.
So I've had a lot of parents reach out to me about this with younger kids that don't want to lose that. So our next meeting is in Canterbury. I think we should open it up to allow them the opportunity to come speak to this for themselves so that everyone can hear. There's concerns about those kids being young, having to be put on a bus that early in the morning. They have to go to the high school, get off that bus, get on another bus, and then go to the middle school. A lot of people feel as though their children are too young for that. And then the potential CST bus can be bus ride. So they do not want that option taken away. It's my understanding that a lot of the families that have recently decided to do that have older siblings that were in middle school already and it's easier. So coming up in those bigger classes will make it okay the same sense. So I want to make sure that those parents have the opportunity that it was on the agenda and we're allowed to come speak to them.
So, when is the conversation going to have regarding these topics and the robotics and anything else on this run up? Because it's already the end of November, and we have December, we throw a lot of things into the calendar too. For some reason, we're not able to meet. So,
You're right, we're getting close.
Yeah.
December 3rd is the next time together.
Yeah, I know Dan's, you brought it up with, the CES teacher versus personal full-time sub. Could we get some, if the approximate numbers on what one full-time sub in the middle school, high school, and elementary would look like, what the cost of that?
So I did run those numbers.
Okay.
And
This is based on bringing a sub in at a general assistant step 1 pay with a single health insurance plan.
Would it be more than $125 per day? So it would be less advantageous for that person to stay.
Although the benefits,
yeah. If you put a full-time sub at each school, it would be $138,018. And that would be a single health and single dental. They may choose a different plan. It doesn't mean they can only choose that. That's what we budgeted.
Yeah.
$138,018 for one at each school. Salary and benefits.
$138,000 per school?
No, for all four
For four.
schools. Yeah, I would put one at each school.
And what's our current number for subs?
We currently are paying $100 a day.
No, what we're budgeting total for subs?
Well, we put in a proposal going to $150 a day for subs.
No, total
The
money
whole
spent.
sub line,
What's that?
like the whole sub line.
Correct.
Exactly.
Is there a supplement?
Yes, there is a subline. 10, 1100, 122. We budgeted $225,000, just the salary piece. That doesn't include FICA and workers' comp.
What was that number again, Debbie?
Which one, the function object?
Yes.
10, 1100, 122. It's on page 1 of the detailed budget.
How many subs is that? If you don't know the total.
I don't, because what ends up happening is we have subs that work, and then we have sub differentials that we pay. So if we have a classroom assistant who ends up covering for a teacher, they get paid a differential. We have teachers that get paid differentials if they're covering during their prep period when a teacher is out on long-term sick or FMLA. So it's not just subs, like someone who comes in for the whole day. It's people that are subbing for other positions, so.
Comes out to about 1,800 hours at your hourly rate, roughly speaking.
So if we did 4 full-time subs of 138,000, we'd have approximately 100 grand left. At $125 a day, that's 800 days, or 800 sub days. I just don't know how many subs a day approximately each building runs.
That really varies, Mark. That's a tough number to come up with.
Right.
Really varies.
Yeah. So I mean, even if you did,
This was based on, this number, the 130 plus, was based on the school calendar, 178 student days, 6.5 hours a day.
that's it. Let's try to get full-time sub in each building. We've got over $100,000 left for day subs if they need it.
So the issue, I think, with that, just thinking ahead here for policies, is that you would be using up almost half of your sub budget for
Yes, my concern is we need a lot more subs on average.
Right.
So like it may not,
Well, that's where at $125 a day, you have basically 800 days, over 800 days, 800 sub days.
I don't know if that's enough.
Right, I don't know if it's,
My concern would be it's not.
At some point, if you brought a full-time person in as a sub, your union is going to say, hey, wait a minute. That's an employee.
Well, but they're not a certified teacher, so they
Oh,
wouldn't
okay.
fall under the teacher collective bargaining agreement.
Just curious, are the subs, are these 1099 employees, or are you paying?
No, they're employees.
So you're paying payroll tax?
Yeah.
I think the idea is good, I just don't know if the math works.
so on the math, so you could have approximately an extra sub per day in each building for the entire school.
But
change funds to pay for the subs.
I just don't know.
Go above and beyond. I'm gonna go back to that pool every time we sit on it.
Well, I mean, if we ran over, we could. And then it'd be a way to at least gauge and see where we're at. I don't know, I mean, I struggle with any warm body off the street. Your kids come home and they say, oh, yeah, it's up today. What do you do? Oh, we play games. We're on the computer. We play board games. I mean, a full-time sub would be like alleviating all this.
I don't know, because if your subs are playing board games and full-time sub isn't a teacher, they may just play board games. Because we're thinking bounced around rooms, like we're teams.
I would hope that the expectation that would not happen. I mean, we still have, at the middle school grades, still not going into all of them. And so, you might, you're right.
Thinking about robotics, does it have to go into appendix B? Like, could the director goal be regular budget, like if we had coaching, would that be appendix B, or does it all have to go in there?
Just the coaching positions themselves would be part of Appendix B unless you were to remove those. Remove that out of Appendix B. The director position, which would be a new position, would be in the operating budget. So what I mentioned at I believe it was the last meeting, if you're going to move on robotics, you could take the Appendix B recommendation, increase the 2 coaching stipends, and put a director position in your operating budget, just like you did in the past, $4,000 for Destination Imagination. It's very similar. Somebody would oversee a program that's running in all 4 schools. That's what we had for Destination Imagination. And then we were paying coaches out of Appendix B.
So the coaches would be made in Appendix B, unless they were part of that. At the next round of negotiations.
I'm inclined to go with the recommendation. But I don't know if we're talking about that tonight or.
So just from where I stand, I don't think it's enough. It would be $6,000 for the high school coach for the entire year. And I know she puts in a lot of work. I don't know what it looks like for her if there was a director overseeing everything. I don't know what, I know like a lot of administrative stuff comes on her plate, but at the end of the day, it's still a lot of work on the coach to get these kids to really watch a game. Congratulations to the team. They won an excellence award this past weekend, the first time in Belmont's history. So to Bob's point, this is making us a very competitive school. We have one of the best robotics teams in the district, or in the region, which is New Hampshire, Vermont. I would argue me as well. So that's the one thing I struggle with is I don't know if that was enough.
See, I look at it, and they have a pretty good HVAC program in the front end. And it's known and known throughout the state. It would seem foolish for the supporting districts and the county to not fund something that puts them on that, and and something that they do well, succeed at. There's students that go to national competitions, with HVAC and plumbing and that type of thing. This is something that obviously has put down on the map. There's a lot of positive academic consequences on the tail end of being involved in this type of program. I totally understand the time commitment on the coaching end of it. It seems foolish not run it.
I'm not sure if this is part of the budgeting process, but I believe it was Alice that mentioned the other meeting that there should be maybe some goals set for the school district about what it wants to do and how it involves the budget. Because it's very easy to spend money. The money can be gone very easily. But if you don't make goals and try to see yourself in that direction, you're gonna say no to things that could have helped improve. Because one of the things I think that would help the school district a lot is if we bring people in to the school district. I know that we talked before about partnering with letting people come into the school district from other school districts. There were other, the people that see the things that are going on here that might want to move here because of it. So as far as the budgeting process, I don't know if there should be some goals set in where the budget is trying to be put in. So then maybe if you don't present a budget that's at the default level, you can tell the presidents, hey, this is an investment because this is where we're headed. I think that'd be really helpful in the budget process. Otherwise, you're coming in, you're just going through the numbers, moving along, and here comes another year, we'll be here next year, just moving along without a sense of direction, something to make you competitive. Because people are losing students, but we shouldn't care about losing students. We should be trying to be bringing people in, because that helps in the state funding, right? The more students we have, we release a lot of the pressure from the tax base that we have. So I don't know, maybe for next time, we can't do that now, but maybe as a recommendation for next season. But like I was saying, a lot of topics that are still in the air. I don't know if you're trying to have a whole board to make decisions, but I think time is coming pretty tight before we run out of time.
I just think we have to come to some closer consensus as to how much we're willing to spend. I mean, we know that robotics is important and that we value it. We have to decide what that dollar amount that we can put to it and where we want to pull it from, I guess, because if we're trying to keep the budget, we're going to increase it to 30,000. Are we going to just increase it, or are we going to look somewhere to save 30,000? I think for the next meeting, we need to have come in with our ideas and we're comfortable.
Yeah, Bryce, I'm trying to find it. How much do we pay the robotics teacher right now?
$2,900?
The teacher? Who teaches?
Oh, no, she
I said the
teaches.
teacher.
She's not just the robotics teacher.
Oh, shit.
No, she teaches she has a robotics class, but it's not just robotics that she teaches.
Teaches physical science as well, right? 2 blocks of robotics.
I didn't know if you made her the director, give her a stipend, $4 grand you talked about. I've heard, oversee that stuff. She may not even be interested. And I think the appendix B thing is fine, because I know Brandy says it's not enough value, but we're getting towards the end of budget season. Do the appendix B this year, and then we have to set as a board as a goal for next year. Figure out how we're going to do better. But we're running out of time. And quite frankly, some board members here talk like this isn't their money they're spending. I'm like, I pay taxes. My taxes keep going up every year. Quite frankly, I've worked harder than I ever have and going backwards. You guys are talking about spending. And like this Bob here, he's like, it's only $150,000. Well, it makes a little difference in my tax bill. $50, $100, that makes a difference. Because everybody in this community pays taxes. And I think we want good education for our children, but at the same time, we still have to put a house, pay electricity, feed the children, get them to school. I mean, I understand, like robotics, yeah, it's great guidance, but I mean, our tax base isn't like other school districts. Because people are like, oh, it's apples to apples, even when you talk about paying staff. It's not. We don't have a big tax base in Canterbury, business tax base in Canterbury, Portland. It's not big. It's not like, go to Winnisquam Region or Guilford, it has all that lakefront property. I mean, after you're listed, what you have to deal with.
Oh, understood. Don't take me wrong. If I suggest that the dollar amount that we're looking at is, I'm not suggesting that anyone's tax bill is inconsequential, just that when we're talking about 0.1% of the total budget, I realize each tenth adds up. So
And
I
it's
get
great
that
when you're
part.
in a school and a town budget, because you essentially are pulling for everybody else. But if you were doing this in your own household, you'd be like, this is madness. And I understand it because it's kind of, I'm not saying it's your fault or anybody's fault, but for some reason, it seems like, you have to go budget. Why? Why do people have to get raises every year? I know the retained element, but there's a lot of people that don't get raises every year. And they still keep working and striving better, and they know eventually the raise will come and it'll be a good one. But I just don't get this constant upward march, That's where I'm coming from, and I'm like, robotics is great. I'd love to throw all kinds of money at it, but I have to be realistic. And like Sean had said about the robotics position, great, yeah, she puts in a lot of work. You can tell she loves it, passionate. But at the same time, you have basketball coaches, and like Sean said, Michael said one time, that's a slippery slope, because they can come back with, well, you gave her all this money, so it's for, and some of these coaches can coach 3 seasons out of their own time. So,
I had a kid that loved basketball. I'd be advocating for a coach that coaches basketball 365 days a year. Maybe our district should hire somebody that does that. But there's going to be a cost to that. And so we are going down a slippery slope of, if we're going to do this for robotics, and I understand why, we should be doing it for any program that wants to run year-round. That's what I think.
I think it would be okay if you prioritize programs based on attractiveness and what it does for the actual mission of the school and the delivery of services to students. And the only big picture thing the 2 big picture components of this, that having spent all those years doing the municipal budget, I can tell you, is the way that our state raises money to pay for essential services doesn't make sense, so don't try. Okay? This is a silly way. Property taxes are a silly way to raise money because they are not connected to any one individual ability to pay a tax. I get it. And fighting that battle for years. But on a big picture level, a top-notch school system enhances the value of the biggest asset in most people's life, which is their house. So if you don't have a good quality school system, then everybody's primary asset, the thing that they may want to retire on or whatever, will actually be diminished in value. So I get that this board is responsible for having, and the staff are responsible for having those rubber meets the road conversations. So it's a healthy discussion to have, right? Do we need this? Do we need that? What makes the most amount of sense for the district to go through? And there's always going to be hard choices to make.
I'm getting a sense of urgency from some of the comments that have been made more recently in this meeting. What you're looking at right now is a 1.82% increase with a default of 1.25%. Where is the board comfortable in bringing a proposed budget forward to the voters? That's what you have to decide on, and then you get into the details as to how you're going to get to that number if it's not the 1.82%. Because you could keep going down the rabbit holes, and all of these are important conversations, but bottom line, I think
it's more than
what's the number?
It's not a rabbit hole. I think we need
What's
to
the
get a
number?
solid number for robotics tonight. That way we know what we're looking at. So we all need a consensus on what we want to do.
Yeah.
We've been listening to it for like 6 weeks now, so.
I don't have to have a number for robotics, but I like green sheet better. Overall, I don't think it's voters a choice. I want to have a budget, proposed budget that's below the default. Because that shows, to me, good budgeting. If we're not losing, if we're not ripping all kinds of teachers and positions, and we're providing a budget that's less than default, I find that to be impressive, that hard work. Yeah, I can see the point about not giving people a choice, but I would rather, advertise that we're proposing a budget that's below the default. We spent all these hours working on it. So that's kind of where I come in, whether we fund robotics this amount or that amount, or this position or that position. If you want to know where you stand on the overall, I guess that's what.
I think that's helpful, Sean. Where do people stand on the overall? There's a very firm opinion about you want a proposed that is below the default. So that's an opinion to work off of. Just not sure where everyone else is in that type of firm opinion about the overall numbers here. Because then you get into the details about how you're going to get to it.
Guys, I look at it probably a little bit differently, regardless of what the number is, whether it's half, less, or more. Is the value there for the money that we're spending? And sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no. I think a lot of that can be confirmed when we get the specific class numbers. But I don't think voters are gonna go down 1.18 or 0.18 increase. I mean, I think it's very unrealistic to think that more than 50% of the people are gonna look at that and say, nope, I don't like the idea of a 0.18 increase. Looks good to me.
Katie, you got last year's one here, right? I did. What was the budget that the percentage of voters approved last year? You said that? What was that?
It was big.
6 point, over 6%.
And then we also talked about tax rate increases. So to Mark's point, I think we underestimate the community's ability to see the value of education.
The problem with last year's vote is that they didn't feel the pain in June 2nd. They're seeing the pain now. In December's vote.
So we told them to re-vote it. And I know people are
Short, yeah, short memories, and there's very low, there's low comprehension, and I'm not making fun of anybody, there's low comprehension on how the tax rates versus assessed value versus tax load, how that whole Bermuda Triangle impacts their law.
Well, again, Debbie we don't have some of the numbers yet, but I'm saying, what I feel I want to have for a budget. I totally understand that my taxes can probably jump no matter what we do. And that's frustrating. But all we're talking about is a proposed increase. I've made my opinion. And I know that when we get the revenue projection and you run the formulas, $300,000 home is going to increase by that amount of taxes.
So the only way to combat that is to come in low. Do we have the ability and the desire to do that?
I've heard
So-
a couple of people bringing in, very people.
My concern with coming in below the default budget is, as riveting as these conversations are, I don't think that everybody's listening in all the time. And I fear that there would be concern from taxpayers saying, wait, the default budget is higher than what the school board is proposing? How does that happen? I thought that, and I don't.
Not very.
Yeah, it does happen occasionally. I've seen it.
I'd be confused if I wasn't sitting at these meetings. I don't know. I fully understand and appreciate that the increase is an increase. But Mark, like you were saying, and actually a number of people, adding value, I mean, to what we're providing students. I think I'd be okay with the 1.8, quite frankly. Quite.
Yeah, 1.8 we hope,
Thank you. Sorry.
It is 1.8.
Did it-
Oh,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
sorry, yes.
Yeah, 1.82.
Right.
Day two.
Yeah. I moved this one. So if we fund robotics to the maximum extent, round number, that the whole program at $30,000, what impact is that?
Well, you're looking at my position on robotics is, did anybody help Mira come up with these numbers?
She never contacted me.
Should anyone offer to help her? I know she has been super stressed about this. Is the director position, is that number adequate? She said she had to pull it out. Like, what does it look like with the hours and the effort that's going into it? That's my only issue there. I don't think the coach's stipend is enough.
I reached out to her and gave her my contact information, offered to put some time into it, and she did not.
I know she's been like super busy and it's been very overwhelming for her to keep coming back here and keep asking information. She has indicated that this level is not sustainable, so if we do nothing, that's a decision we are making for the future.
I think we're having two different discussions. I thought we were
Well, I know
talking
he's
about.
looking at pulling up the amount for if they funded it fully, even though we didn't really talk about what fully funding it looked like. I was just saying that I think that we maybe didn't do, like, that's why, so the issue is, and we don't know what, so she came up with a couple of proposals, et cetera.
I'm just figuring, worst case scenario in the budget, what does it look like if we, if we put everything on?
But the question was, what are we comfortable as far as like budget increase for next year?
So I'm fine.
Whatever the number is, we all have our numbers in our head. And then afterwards, I still think we can have a discussion on, we want to fit robotics in, how we can improve it. We can have those discussions, but I feel like we need to have that shell, that foundation as far as what the increase is going to be, and then we maneuver within the numbers. That's my, because I just feel like we're going to keep going back and forth as far as, robotics and budget. Let's just say what we think we're comfortable with for a budget increase, and then we'll touch robotics after that.
I'm gonna say 2 and that includes robotics.
So I did not go back and calculate all of the fixed costs with her proposal. But if you, I think it was $34,000 that she had, it was going to add to the budget, correct?
The
I thought it
highest
was like
amount,
20.
the highest amount out of all the options was 24,913.
Which still doesn't include, it doesn't include the fixed costs.
Right.
I mean, if you add a third of that, it'd probably be close.
I don't know, it depends. Again, I didn't run the numbers because if it's a currently employee that she's who's getting retirement, they have to have retirement as well. But based on that number,
So what I would like to see for robotics is the director position, the appendix B stipend that was proposed for 3 seasons.
so the director position at what amount?
Well, she proposed 10.
So
I don't know if that is enough. I don't know if that's too much.
So based on the Appendix B committee's recommendation for the 2 coaches, that would add $8,250.24 to the budget. Based on the proposal of her $10,000 stipend would add $10,846.37 to the budget with the fixed cost items.
So the 10,000 would be separate from the appendix B, right? The director
Correct.
position. Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure we're clear.
Yeah.
So what was the amount that the Appendix B committee recommended for high school coach?
That would add, well,
Just a dollar amount.
the dollar amount for the high school coach. What it adds or what the stipend would be? Which are you asking?
Total stipend.
Total stipend.
The stipend would be $6,920.40. But then you have fixed costs for one season.
But I would also say that 6,000 is a special category because
Yes,
it was considered for a whole year.
it created a special
So I would-
category,
So
yes.
if you're gonna do 3 seasons, you should be doing 3 seasons of what,
Like a varsity coach?
right? Or-
Yeah. What's a varsity coach get paid?
All right.
I would support that. Yeah. 3 seasons. And then for the middle school, we did not talk to Mr. Friend, so we don't know if he would be like a 2 season or a 3 season.
There's less competition with at the middle school level. You could easily get away with two.
And that's what I'm thinking, I just know that we haven't heard from him, but at least it's a starting point.
I think we're like throwing numbers around that can make it look very confusing. Can we look at the actual proposal because there's actually specific amounts so that we don't end up with way more than.
She used the amount that the Appendix B committee recommended for a full year. So what we're saying
wanna
is
see this, Edgar?
varsity
No, you
coach. What would theirs be per season?
So a varsity coach is $5,767 next year. That would be like a boys' high school varsity basketball.
And they all get the same, like varsity coach, that's the same for each. 5,767.
767. That's just the salary piece.
What about a middle school coach?
Middle school, which one? If it was like middle school volleyball, that's $2,191.46.
We used, what did you use for the high school basketball? What's middle school basketball?
Middle school basketball is, 2,768.16.
2016. And I'm assuming there's no difference between boys and girls, it's opposite.
Correct.
So I say we take, or this is my proposal, take the 5767, multiply that by 3, the 2768, multiply that by 2. And then that's what Randy wants. 3 seasons at a varsity coach level for high school, 2 seasons at A for the middle school, and then the $10,000 thrift. Then the discussion would be is, does grant money to reduce that?
I don't know if there's going to be grant money or not. We won't know. This is the second year of a 2-year grant. And we have not typically reduced the stipend in Appendix B by the grant because Appendix B is very clearly a percentage of the Bachelor Step 1. So we don't reduce those stipends by any grant money. They just get additional money if we have the stipend in the grant.
And just a question, where is the money coming for the additional cost? Is there travel, materials?
So right now, we have the money based on Amira standing at the deliberative session and adding money from the floor. So there is some money in the general fund for both the middle school and the high school. And we use that, it's in supplies right now, but what happened was the grant was late getting approved last year, so some of that money was used for the fees to pay for the competitions until the grant was approved, and then we used the rest for supplies. The grant that we've written has covered a certain amount of transportation. It does cover some supplies and kits. It does cover a small amount for t-shirts for the kids who are competing, and then the stipend. And it's a $15,000 grant. It caps the stipend with fixed costs at $2,000. It caps the transportation at $1,200, and then the rest of the money can be used for supplies and competition fees. So if the grants go away, unless they're collecting money from fundraising or sponsors, those have to be used to cover the costs.
So what was Randy's total?
Not there yet.
Back to your question, Sean, or maybe it was Michael, where are we comfortable at? I know Randy said, no more than 2%. I would definitely be regrettably agreeing with the 2, and I think we should work at trying to get less. I mean, we're in a window.
So Randy's proposal would add $25,045 to the budget, and it would take us, if you're looking at the purple page, periwinkle, whatever, from 1.82, it would go to 1.91.
Perfect, underneath the 2. So I am happy with 1.91.
That's not covering the proposal that she was talking about. It's only covering the high school reviews.
Right, that does not add a coordinator.
Oh, I wanted the director and the 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, how much did you wanted 10,000 for the director?
Yes, because we don't know, it would be different now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know everything's
Yeah, the proposals include 6 new positions, 5 new positions. We're not even talking about that. Another one, 13 new positions.
I think it was B that she was more limited. Or the second one.
If she thinks B is sufficient, I'm okay with that, but I'm just concerned
Which
that,
was,
I don't know what, like I said, I don't know what it looks like if you take that.
21,000, right?
All right, so adding 10,000 with fixed cost items actually increases increases the budget 35,893, and that's 1.95%.
And do we still need to add the elementary?
Well, you would, but those charters haven't even been approved, so they wouldn't be impacted until the following year. Because there are no elementary robotics approved as charters. And they would have to be in existence 1 full year before the Appendix B committee meets. And the Appendix B committee meets in September. So they would have had to have been approved by the board prior to this past September to even be qualified or considered for 96, 97. So there won't be any stipends for the elementary for a while.
So for the B suggestion, it wouldn't be that whole amount this year. The following year, because it includes the 2 elementary schools, right? She was just giving a scope of how much.
It includes the advisor,
Yeah.
the BES and CES.
Yeah, I'm just running the numbers based on what Randy's talking about. Having the 3 coaches at the 3 seasons at the high school, 2 seasons at the middle school, plus the coordinator stipend. It has nothing to do with the elementary.
If we went to default, would these still go forward?
That would be up to the board, because if the default budget, it would not go forward in the following year's default budget, because it's not contractually obligated at that point. It hasn't been added to the Appendix B under the collective bargaining agreement.
So we really want a budget that passes, including this.
Is the payroll and the benefits coordinator position adjustment definitely going to come out of the budget?
Now, all those potential other adjustments have not been taken out. Just what is that top section is known. All the other ones have not been touched.
Because it looks like there's wiggle room
A little
with
bit.
some of these ones, like PSAT, that
Yeah.
position.
Yeah, the adjustment.
Even maybe the sum, they are comfortable with 1.5 of it.
So I know that everyone is probably thinking that I am crazy right now, but just to put this in perspective, if I take all the coaches' positions for basketball,
At the moment, they're all gonna ask for more money.
that's $20,586.99 a season we spend on basketball between the high school, middle school, and elementary schools. So I just to put it in perspective. Those are just for coaches.
So, I don't want to be a wise ass once again. What is the requirement if somebody wants to come to us and ask for more money in their program? Like if drama wants to improve their program, they need to do it for a couple of years, or can they just come now and say, I wanted multiple stipends and I wanted to rent their room? Like you have to prove it, like
Well, last year
they
we changed.
lost the prove it, I understand.
Yeah, Mr.
But like, you basically, if, for those that would approve this change, we've opened the floodgates to, we're letting programs do pretty much whatever they want, and ask for the money to help reimburse them. And that's a very slippery slope. I'm sorry.
So we have the Appendix B committee that meets in September, and
Doesn't matter, we're overruling it. We are.
true, right. But we have, the Appendix B committee has made recommendations to the board for changes in categories in the Appendix B. But you're right, if the board is going to entertain this, then you could have anyone come to the board and make requests.
I have a kid in the school district that plays softball, and I want a softball program better than we have. And the coaches are willing to put in the time, they should come to us and say, I want to be a full season coach and I want 3 seasons worth of study. And I assume we'll just say, yeah. Huh?
It is NHIAA rules of what you do.
Not outside of practice time.
If we had a baking club, a board, and say I would partner with FBLA to make upgrades to our kitchens and cafeterias so that we can come up with a business plan and sell things to support it, I would totally support that. Like, clubs should have visions, they should be able to advocate for resources and things that they want.
I guess I'd be concerned about the overall budget, like where does it end? I totally, and I said this, I'm so impressed with the vision, the amount of time that Americans into the program. Above and beyond, way above. Totally impressed by that. But there are no boundaries. And there's a risk when there's no boundaries, and that risk is burden. And I guess if we were supporting that, then I feel like we should be supporting it for the big club, and for any club that wants to put in more time, require more resources.
If they can justify the positive academic pieces to it, then go ahead and present and we get to make a decision.
Isn't the boundary this board, right?
Right.
That you control it, because you get to decide if it's a reasonable proposal to serve the education mission, it makes sense to spend the money or not. So it doesn't feel like you're letting them off the leash, so to speak. Doesn't miss something. Because as long as the board retains that level of scrutiny, that it sounds like you want to lie.
So with the increases, again, just for conversation here, so if we fully funded for robotics, so we're at a 1.95% increase. When we come back to our next budget meeting, what if we kind of, we took a look at, and we had a conversation about retaining fund balance. We have some potential ideas on how we can offset. I looked at it, and the rate said no more than 2%. Just for running numbers, I said, all right, what would it look like if we had a 1% decrease and we used the retained fund balance to try to offset some other stuff? And if you offset 0.95%, it's $279,000 or something along those lines, which would not gobble up the retained, all of the retained fund balance. So, I don't know. That'd be our homework. So if we did that, we'd be down at 1% increase, which is more desirable than 2% increase. And then we might still get some of the things that we got.
Yeah, like it was said earlier, that actually this time around, people are actually feeling the impact of the budget change. If there's a time for you to come as close to the default as possible, because you might get a default, most likely for sure, is this time. So as close as possible to the default, the better it is. Because you don't want to be in a situation again. Planning something and then you're not able to fund it. That's why you should look at things like we need to actually figure it out or come back on it. Come as close as possible because people are going to talk about it once it's cool, once they get their opinion.
They already got it.
Canterbury still.
Debbie, how long have we had SB2? 8 years?
This would be the 9th year.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did, just in case people care, I did send board members the voting results for the last 8 years back on March 13th. And it looks like 6 of the 8 years we had proposed budgets that were less than the default budget. So 2 years we had proposed budgets higher than the default budget. Of course, those 2 years were 2 of the lowest yes votes percentages, as you would expect. But last year, our budget was higher than the default, and we had 57% vote yes. That 57% is one of the lowest numbers we've had. I think that's the lowest number we had in 8 years. So I anticipate our budget is going to pass no matter what we propose, because we have 2 great towns that care about education. But we are getting closer and closer to that 50%, where I think it's going to be tougher to sell budgets. But anyway, that's in your emails from March 13th. Has votes on the other categories too, like expendable trust, SREA budgets.
So you're looking to be closer to the default budget. You're comfortable around under
1.958.
1.82. Yeah.
Probably default. I think I'm close to default. I'm more comfortable at the 1. But how we get to that 1 can be debated. I think Sean Randy had something that we can chew on a little bit on some of those reserve funds.
I think we're pretty much split. We talk about 1.82. I'm comfortable with how it's brought forward.
Did we ask for budget advisory members?
Sure.
I'm comfortable with the me. I think it's a responsible budget. I don't see where we're overspending. I think it's responsible.
I'd go along with Heidi, and then I would suggest the board may consider taking some of the adjustments up front to make the presentation value look more palatable to voters, to exercise your fiduciary responsibility and then hold some of them in reserve in case you need them later. That's how I would do it.
Mine is close to the budget and default responsibility. If I'm elected.
So Debbie, I know you made reference at one point in the conversation about only pulling something out of appendix B. And again, just to be clear, we can't pull anything out of appendix B without breaking into negotiated agreement.
Correct. The only thing that the board can do is if you have an activity that is not happening, the Appendix B committee
Yeah.
can suspend that activity. We only have a couple that are not occurring, and it has to be 2 or more years. And if it hasn't run for 2 years, then we recommend suspending the activity.
Just want to make sure I'm understanding. You're not opposing, you just asked a question. I get that, but we're increasing robotics, but potentially pulling other appendix positions if we could. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, when I look at the appendix B, I look at it as what, for a club and activity, does it bring academic value to the, to the school? And while my own daughter really likes MED, and when she goes to it, I struggle with paying someone after school to run a MED. And again, Georgia likes it, she comes home and tells me all about it, but my gut says, what are we doing spending on something like that? I mean, there were many times over the years that I ran a computer club because I was after school anyway, and kids wanted to show up because they could link all the computers and they could compete against each other, and stuff. And a couple days a week, I was like, yeah, sure, come in, because I was there for school anyway.
There's an academic component.
There was no academic component, and I never.
No, there is.
It was more games. It was games. So
Kids are going to college.
I understand that.
I feel like you could prove a point about academic component to all of these. So,
Possibly, and some of them are going to have more than others. And so when I look at the appendix B, that's what I'm looking at. And so again, I'm not sitting here saying let's take the hatchet, to all sorts of stuff on appendix B. But I do think moving forward, especially in the next negotiated agreement, that stuff like this we should be raising our eyebrows.
So I will say, as the parent of the Dungeons and Dragons child, it helps them create imagination. They tell stories, they write things, they role play. Like, I can see these kids going into drama in the future.
And I played it as a kid too.
There's a social aspect.
Yep.
And Mark, one of the things, and I will point out, is part of the reason that we have the policy about charters is because people wanted to keep adding things, and the board was like, we don't know what's going on. People just start these clubs. It used to be 3 years later, they would automatically get a stipend. So now they have to create a charter, which gets approved by the principal, the superintendent, and then comes to the board. So if a charter's been approved, it's never recommended or recognized for any kind of stipend. So it's board approval of the charters that start the process.
I just sort of keeping track of where people are at right now, and very far from consensus. So there is no vote at this point. My concern, just tag teams, what Edgar was saying, is that we go into December, which I still feel our timing is still on point. for our budget calendar. But come that first meeting in December, there's gonna have to be more consensus in order to vote on a budget than we're seeing right now. Because I have Sean at below default, Jeff at below default, Randy at 1.958, Allison content with the 1.8 as proposed. Mark, you're at 1%.
Yeah.
Jill, you're
0.8.
content with the 1.82% as proposed. And then from our budget committee members, we've got Heidi and Bob at 1.8 and Edgar is as close to default as possible. So really at that first meeting in December, you can really have to roll up the sleeves and come to a decision in order to be able to move forward and get some consensus around. You have all kinds of options that have been presented, and now it's just a matter of where do you want to land.
Part of being able to do that is why we were asking for class sizes and and teacher vote. And now we're going to get that on the 12th of December, and then immediately be asked to synthesize that information.
So we can provide you that information at your budget meeting if you like, but please tie it to the budget. If you're looking to cut staff, say it and make a motion to do it. So you're going to see low class numbers in our AP courses, our honors courses, and so forth. That doesn't mean that that leads to cutting a position by all means. So doing an analysis of class sizes, you're either doing that analysis to add positions because you have requests that you can't meet, or you're looking to cut positions, which ultimately means you're cutting programs and courses being offered at the high school.
Well,
So
we
just
should be looking at that
cut
information
to the
saying,
chase. If that's what you want, then
does that
that's what you need to
opportunity
do.
exist? And the answer could very well be no, it doesn't exist. But that's what I'd like to look at, and I know that information has been requested for well over a year.
That's why we presented you with the average class sizes, and that's why Mr. Finch the other night said you need to put some context to this. Because what you're ultimately going to see is that you're going to see low class sizes for AP courses and for honors courses. And you need to decide if you're going to cut a teaching position that offers those AP courses, then you're not providing those courses to our students, and you're eliminating opportunities for our kids.
Which I think to Bob's point would make us less competitive.
Correct. If you start talking about cutting teaching positions, the exercise you need to go through is what's required, what's not, and what would ultimately impact the opportunities being provided to our students. Class sizes are not going to tell you that. Trust me on that. Being the one that had to come up with 160 plus reduction in force positions in the Manchester School District and looking at class sizes has no impact on it.
In light of some of the discussion about adding to programs, I think it would be kind of foolish to cut teachers. I would be interested in the data, not from a budget perspective, it's more of a bigger discussion. Block scheduling, how many classes we offer, what are the numbers? Are there additional offerings we can offer our students? That's a much bigger discussion. That data will help having this.
Absolutely.
But that's my purpose.
You tie it to budget, you're either adding positions or you're cutting positions. When requests come up for class sizes, the undertone is reducing staffing positions by looking at low class sizes and enrollment numbers. Historically, that has not changed.
I just want to reiterate that I would like to see the kindergarten, fifth grade position put on a formal agenda for the first meeting in December to allow parents to come and speak if they so desire.
On the budget work session agenda,
Would it
that's
have to be a
December 3rd.
board meeting, for, I'm not sure what the.
Public meetings that you can put on an
Yeah, that'd be
agenda.
the
like-
third. Yeah, let's put it on the budget.
Great, so looking forward to the third, we're gonna come home, making some of these tough decisions, we're going, and we're do. Anything else for tonight around the budget? Move on to public communication and correspondence once again. Seeing none. Have anything in non-public this evening? Move that. All in favor, say aye.